The brunch at the Gilded Lily was exactly the kind of place I despised. Too much marble, not enough acoustic dampening, and coffee that cost $12 but tasted like lukewarm battery acid. I sat at the edge of the circular velvet booth, my back straight, my hands resting on a clean linen napkin. I am a man of ledger lines and balanced columns. 40 years as a forensic accountant for the Department of Justice teaches you that the world isn't made of people, it's made of receipts. Across from me, my daughter-in-law, Chloe, was performing for her phone. "Oh my God, you guys, the lighting here is literally everything," she whispered to a gimbal-mounted iPhone 15 Pro Max. She pouted, adjusted a stray blonde highlight, and then did something that made my internal audit trigger hum like a live wire. She reached up to adjust a necklace. It was a vintage Chanel piece, gold-linked with a distinct clover-shaped pendant set with seed pearls. I didn't need a magnifying glass to identify it. I had bought that necklace in a boutique in Paris in 1982 for my wife, Martha. It was supposed to be in a velvet-lined mahogany box in the back of my floor safe, intended for my granddaughter's 21st birthday. "That's a beautiful piece, Chloe," I said. My voice was the low, dry rasp of a man who spent his life reading tax havens in basement offices. "I didn't realize you were into vintage French jewelry." Chloe didn't flinch. That was her first mistake. A person with a clean conscience would have been surprised. A guilty person prepares their face. She smiled, a bright, cinematic flash of porcelain veneers. "This? Oh, Silas, it's just a lucky find. I was going through some donation boxes in the attic last week. You know, the stuff you said was clutter. I figured I'd breathe some new life into it for the gram. It's all about the aesthetic of old money right now." Clutter. Martha's legacy was clutter. "I see," I murmured. I took a slow sip of my overpriced coffee. "I don't recall authorizing any donation sweeps of the master suite. But then again, at 70, I suppose the clutter of my memory is just as bad as the attic." "Exactly," Chloe laughed, turning back to her camera to record a "What I'm Eating" segment. "You just focus on your crossword puzzles, Silas. Let me handle the heavy lifting of the estate. It's a full-time job keeping this family relevant in the digital age." I looked at her, really looked at her. She was wearing a $3,000 silk blouse and carrying a Birkin bag that cost more than my first house. My son, David, was a mid-level marketing manager. He made good money, but he didn't make Birkin and Chanel money. In my world, we have a term for this: Unexplained Wealth Variance. When the check came, Chloe didn't even look at it. She tapped a gold-plated business card against the waiter's terminal. I caught the name on the card before she tucked it away. Chloe Torn Media, LLC. An LLC, the favorite tool of the amateur embezzler. I waited until I got home to my quiet, drafty Victorian. David and Chloe lived in the guest wing, a renovation I'd funded 3 years ago to keep my family close. I went straight to my study, a room filled with the smell of old paper and the hum of a high-end encrypted server. I sat down at my desk and pulled a leather-bound notebook from the drawer. This was the manual log for the Martha P. Torn Family Trust. It was a closed system. I was the sole trustee. David was the beneficiary. Chloe was a line item. I logged into the trust's digital management portal. My fingers moved with the muscle memory of a man who helped the DOJ dismantle the Enron accounts. I didn't look at the main balance first. I looked at the operating expenses. There it was. March 15th, $15,000. Transaction memo: quarterly structural maintenance and marketing consultancy, Torn Media Group. The first crack wasn't a fracture, it was a canyon. I hadn't hired a marketing consultant, and the structural maintenance on this house was handled by a man named Gus, who took cash and gave me handwritten receipts on the back of lumberyard flyers. I pulled the filing for Torn Media Group from the Secretary of State's website. Registered agent, Chloe Torn Media, LLC. Primary address, my own guest wing. She wasn't just stealing jewelry, she was invoicing the estate. She was treating my late wife's legacy as a production budget for her influencer lifestyle. She thought because I spent my afternoons in a cardigan staring at the garden that I had forgotten how to follow a paper trail. She thought the digital age was a shield that would hide her from a man who helped the DOJ dismantle the Enron accounts. I leaned back in my chair, the green glow of the monitor reflecting in my glasses. My heart wasn't racing. Accountants don't get angry. We get forensic. I opened a fresh spreadsheet. I titled it Project Vanity, Asset Recovery. I began to download the last 12 months of bank statements, every sponsored trip to Tulum, every unboxing video featuring designer shoes, every influencer retreat at a 5-star spa. I was going to cross-reference every single one of them against the trust's disbursements. The sound of Chloe's laughter drifted through the vents from the guest wing. She was probably filming a life update. "You should have looked at the fine print, Chloe," I whispered to the empty room. "In this house, the aesthetic is strictly GAAP compliant." I clicked Execute on a data scraping tool. The quiet audit had officially begun. In my experience, people like Chloe don't just steal a little, they steal until the bucket is empty. And if she'd been dipping into the trust for a year, she wasn't just a thief, she was a systemic risk. I checked my watch, 4:13 p.m. I had exactly 3 days before the next scheduled consultancy fee was set to auto-draft. It was time to see just how deep the rabbit hole went.
The following morning, the kitchen smelled of expensive artisanal avocado oil and the sharp chemical scent of Chloe's hairspray. I was at the butcher block island, meticulously hand-grinding my coffee beans, 85 rotations for a medium coarse sediment. It's a meditative process. It requires patience. Chloe, on the other hand, was a whirlwind of frantic digital energy. She was wearing a workout set that cost more than my first car, scrolling through her phone with a thumb that moved like a hummingbird's wing. "Silas," she said, not looking up, "we need to talk about the old world accounts. I was looking at the quarterly projections for the trust last night. It's depressing. The yields are stagnant. You've got half the liquidity tied up in municipal bonds and gold bullion. It's like managing a museum, not a portfolio." I poured the grounds into the French press. "Museums preserve things, Chloe. That's the point of a trust, to ensure the present value remains constant for the next generation." She finally looked up, huffing a sigh that was practiced for the camera, full of weary, youthful wisdom. "But the world has changed. Inflation is eating your preservation alive. I've been doing some research into high-velocity digital assets, NFTs, DAO-governed real estate, social token flipping. If we pivot just 30% of the principal, we could triple the payout for David and Toby by next year." "Pivot," I repeated. That's a very corporate word for gambling with a dead woman's life savings. Chloe's expression shifted. The helpful daughter-in-law mask didn't slip. It hardened into something more condescending. She walked over and placed a hand on mine, the one holding the kettle. Her skin was cold. "Silas, I say this with love, but you're struggling. I saw you yesterday staring at that spreadsheet for 3 hours. You didn't even hear me come in. The complexity of modern finance is moving faster than you can track. You're getting confused by the clutter of the digital age." I looked at her hand, then up at her eyes. "Confused? I spent my career tracking money through the dark web before you knew how to use a mouse, Chloe." "And that's exactly the problem," she snapped, her voice rising an octave. "You're stuck in the 90s mindset of paper trails and cold-calling banks. Everything is instantaneous now. You think you're seeing discrepancies when you're actually just misreading the auto-balancing algorithms. David and I were talking. We think it's time you signed over the administrative power of attorney, just for the trust. Let me handle the noise so you can focus on your health. You've been so forgetful lately. You even forgot where you put Martha's necklace." The audacity of it was almost impressive. She was wearing the stolen necklace under her sweatshirt. I could see the faint outline of the clover pendant against the fabric. She was telling me I was forgetful of the very thing she had taken. In the DOJ, we call this financial grooming. You isolate the target, convince them they are incompetent, and then offer to save them by taking their keys. Forgetful, I said softly. Is that what David thinks? He's worried, truly. He doesn't want to see you have a breakdown over a decimal point. Sign the papers this afternoon. I've already drafted them through my LLC's legal portal. It'll simplify everything. She slid a tablet across the marble counter. It was a digital signature app. The document was titled Asset Management Realignment and Delegation. I didn't touch it. I'll need to run my own audit first, Chloe. I'm a man of due diligence, remember. Chloe's eyes flashed with a momentary jagged panic before she smoothed it over with a laugh. Silas, there is no audit for the blockchain. You either trust the system or you get left behind. Don't be stubborn. It makes you look senile. She grabbed her green juice and marched out toward her studio in the guest wing, the door clicking shut with a finality that echoed in the quiet kitchen. I stood there, the kettle whistling unnoticed. She wasn't just stealing anymore. She was gaslighting the trustee. She was trying to declare me non-functional to bypass the final safeguards I had built into the trust. She wanted the golden key to the principal, the $7 million Martha and I had saved over 40 years of government service and smart, boring investments. I turned off the stove. I didn't sign the tablet. Instead, I went back to my study. I opened the folder for Chloe Torn Media LLC again. I didn't look at the bank statements this time. I looked at the metadata of her influencer posts. I ran a specialized scraping script I'd kept from a 2019 money laundering case involving click farms in Eastern Europe. The results: follower count, 1.2 million. Authenticity rating, 14%. Top interaction geolocation, St. Petersburg, Russia, Dhaka, Bangladesh. She was using the trust's money to buy fake social proof. She was paying for fake likes, fake comments, and fake engagement to trick sponsors into thinking she was a luxury icon. She was an economic mirage. But there was something else, a recurring payment of $2,000 to a company called Prime Aesthetics. I cross-referenced the address. It wasn't a marketing firm. It was a high-end plastic surgery clinic in Beverly Hills. She wasn't marketing the estate. She was invoicing the trust for her Botox. I leaned back, my pulse steady, my mind a cold, calculating machine. Chloe thought me was a museum piece. She didn't realize, in a museum, the most dangerous things are the ones behind the glass, silent and perfectly preserved. I checked my watch. 10:15 a.m. I picked up my burner phone and dialed a number for a former colleague at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN. "It's Silas," I said. "I need a blue light deep dive on a domestic LLC. I suspect structured embezzlement disguised as digital marketing. And I think I'm going to need a suspicious activity report triggered by Friday." I hung up. Chloe wanted high velocity. I was about to give her a lesson in terminal velocity. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely.
The study felt smaller today, the shadows stretching long across the rows of leather-bound tax codes and case files that lined the walls. I sat in my wingback chair, the one Martha had bought me when I finally transitioned from a field auditor to a senior lead at the DOJ. The leather was cracked in places, a map of 40 years of sitting, thinking, and dismantling the lies of men much more powerful than Chloe. I pulled a small wooden box from the bottom drawer of my desk. It didn't have a digital lock. It required a physical key, which I kept on a chain around my neck. Inside was a stack of Polaroids and handwritten ledgers from 1978. This was the paper age Chloe mocked. I looked at a photo of Martha. She was standing in front of our first investment, a dilapidated duplex in Northern Virginia that we spent our weekends gutting and insulating ourselves. She was covered in drywall dust, holding a tape measure, laughing at something I had said. Martha was a high school math teacher, but her true brilliance was in resource allocation. She lived by a simple, unbreakable law. Silas, we don't buy what we want today, so our children can have what they need tomorrow. She had handwritten every single entry in this ledger for 30 years. Oct 1984, $500 to Vanguard S&P 500 Index, skipped vacation. June 1992, $2,000 to Toby's Future Fund, sold the old Buick. Every dollar in the Martha P. Thorne Family Trust wasn't just currency, it was a unit of sacrifice. It was a missed dinner, a mended coat, and a decade of driving cars until the floorboards rested through. It was built on the principle of showing your work. I closed the ledger and felt a cold, clinical heat rising in my chest. Chloe saw this trust as a content budget. She saw Martha's jewelry as props for a lifestyle she hadn't earned. She was defecating on 40 years of discipline because she wanted to look relevant to 1 million bots in St. Petersburg. But then I found the ghost in the file. I pulled out the original trust deed, drafted in 1998. There was a specific clause Martha had insisted on, one I'd almost forgotten. Clause 14.4, the Educational and Medical Covenant. It stated that 25% of the annual yield was strictly earmarked for the direct health and educational enrichment of the grandchildren. It couldn't be touched for administrative fees or market reinvestment. It was a protected cell. I logged back into the trust's digital portal and ran a category variance report. The numbers didn't just drift, they plummeted. The 25% earmarked for my grandson, Toby, had been systematically recoded as Lifestyle Branding Consultation by Chloe's LLC. Toby is 7 years old. He has a severe speech impediment and requires specialized occupational therapy that costs $3,000 a month. Last week, David had mentioned they were scaling back the sessions because the insurance was getting difficult. Insurance wasn't the problem. The clout was. She was stealing from her own son's ability to speak so she could buy likes on a photo of her drinking champagne in a rented bathtub. I leaned back, the judge's mindset locking into place. In the DOJ, we had a nickname for people who stole from protected classes: low-hanging fruit. They are the easiest to catch because their greed makes them blind to the tripwire clauses built by professionals. I looked at the portrait of Martha on my desk. Her eyes seemed to watch me, calm and exacting. She doesn't show her work, Martha. She just erases ours. I picked up my pen. I didn't write a check. I wrote a formal notice of disputed disbursement. I wasn't going to confront her with a lecture. I was going to confront her with the one thing an influencer fears most: the loss of liquidity. I checked my watch. 2:30 p.m. I went to the guest wing and knocked on the door of Chloe's studio. I heard her voice, high and performative, talking about mindset shifts and manifesting abundance. She opened the door, her ring light reflecting in her eyes like two halos of artificial divinity. "Silas, I'm right in the middle of a Get Ready With Me live stream. Is it urgent?" "Just a quick question, Chloe," I said, my face a mask of grandfatherly confusion. "I was looking at the Toby Fund. I noticed a large transfer to an LLC. I must have misread the ledger. I'm getting so forgetful, you know." Chloe's smile didn't reach her eyes. It was a tactical baring of teeth. "Oh, that was just an inter-account sweep to protect against market volatility. Don't worry about it, Silas. I've got the new guard watching the numbers. Just sign that power of attorney tonight, and you won't have to stress your brain with these old-fashioned questions." Of course, the new guard. How foolish of me. I walked away. I didn't look back.
She thought she was manifesting abundance. She didn't realize she was actually manifesting a federal audit. The first crack had widened into a fault line, and I was about to trigger the earthquake.
Chloe believed I was a relic, a piece of mid-century furniture gathering dust in the study. She didn't realize that a DOJ forensic accountant never truly retires. We just stop filing the paperwork with the government and start filing it for ourselves. The quiet audit is the most lethal phase of a financial investigation. It's the period where you gather the rope and let the target weave the noose. You don't ask questions, you don't send emails, you simply sit in the silence and watch the numbers move like shadows against a wall. I didn't use the home Wi-Fi. I used the dedicated encrypted satellite uplink I'd kept from my consulting days. I bypassed the user-friendly dashboard Chloe had set up for the trust, the one with the pretty pie charts and the estimated growth projections. I went straight to the raw transaction logs, RTL, from the clearinghouse bank. I saw the vampire drains immediately. Chloe wasn't just skimming, she was automating the theft. She had set up a series of micro-transfers, amounts under $200, triggered 4 times a day, moving from the trust's liquid cash reserve into a digital wallet titled CT Venture Growth. In the accounting world, we call this salami slicing. If you take $1 from $1 million, no one notices. If you take $1 1,000 times a day, you can fund a lifestyle without ever triggering a bank's internal high-value alert. But Chloe was an amateur. She was using a digital wallet linked to her iPhone's Apple Pay. I ran a node trace on the wallet's recent activity. Friday, 10:14 p.m., $4,200 to the Velvet Rope Boutique. Saturday, 2:45 p.m., $8,500 to Charter Flight Group, one way to Aspen. Monday, 9 a.m., $2,200 to Bot Blast Pro, engagement services. She wasn't pivoting to crypto, she was liquefying the principal to buy the appearance of success. She was a ghost ship, fueled by the blood of Martha's 40-year career. I leaned back, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my glasses. My pulse was a steady 65 beats per minute. I wasn't angry. I was calculating the liability. I opened a secondary window and pulled up Chloe's influencer tax filings from the previous year. She had filed them through her LLC, claiming a net loss of $80,000. She was using the trust's stolen money as reinvested capital to offset her personal tax burden. That wasn't just embezzlement, that was tax fraud. I spent the next 6 hours building a shadow ledger. I mapped every single marketing fee, every consultancy draw, and every micro-transfer back to a specific designer purchase or a bot farm invoice. I created a heat map of greed. The total unauthorized disbursement over the last 18 months, $412,650. She had stolen nearly $500,000 of Toby's future and Martha's past, and she had done it while calling me senile over Sunday dinner. I pulled a high-capacity encrypted drive from my safe and began the data export. I wasn't just saving spreadsheets, I was saving the chain of custody. I included the metadata from her Instagram posts, cross-referenced with the time-stamped receipts from the trust account. If this went to a courtroom, I didn't want a he said, she said, I wanted a mathematical certainty. I heard the front door slam. Chloe was back from a brand meeting. I heard her heels clicking on the hardwood, her voice loud and demanding as she spoke to my son, David. He's just being stubborn, David. He's hoarding the trust like a dragon on a gold pile, while our brand is literally dying for a capital injection. If he doesn't sign the power of attorney by Friday, we're going to have to look into involuntary conservatorship for his own sake. I closed the laptop. My hands were perfectly still. She wasn't just coming for the money anymore. She was coming for my liberty. She wanted to lock me in a budget home so she could clear-cut the estate without an old man looking over her shoulder. I checked my watch, 06:45 p.m.
I picked up my phone and sent a short, encrypted message to a contact at the Office of Financial Research. The bird is in the nest. The SAR is ready to be triggered. I have the full forensic backup. We go live on Friday. I walked out of the study and into the kitchen. Chloe was there, pouring a glass of expensive Napa Cabernet, likely bought with a miscellaneous office supply draw from the trust. "Silas, there you are," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Did you think about the realignment papers? I'd hate for you to miss out on the next growth cycle because of a paperwork delay." "I thought about them, Chloe," I said, my face a mask of clinical calm. "I've decided to conduct a comprehensive internal audit first, just to make sure the old guard and the new guard are looking at the same horizon." Chloe's glass stopped halfway to her lips. The first crack in her composure appeared, a slight twitch in her jaw, a narrowing of her eyes. "An audit?" she laughed, though it sounded like glass breaking. "Silas, that takes months. We don't have months. The market moves in seconds." "Not in this house," I said, turning to leave. "In this house, we show our work, and I have all the time in the world." I went to my room and locked the door. The quiet audit was over. The invisible trap was set. Chloe wanted high velocity. She was about to find out what happens when you hit a brick wall at 200 miles per hour. The fluorescent hum of the study was the only sound in the house as the clock neared midnight. I wasn't looking at Chloe's influencer receipts anymore. I was looking at a specific recurring line item that had been buried under a miscellaneous administrative tag for 6 months. Payee, North Star Pediatric Wellness. Status, arrears. Final notice sent. My heart, usually a steady clinical metronome, skipped a beat. Toby, my grandson, the 7-year-old who loved building wooden trains and who struggled to say grandpa without a stutter that broke my heart. I pulled the private medical correspondence from the cloud backup of the trust's secondary server. Chloe had redirected the digital mail to her Media LLC inbox, but she'd forgotten that I owned the domain. The letter. "Dear Mrs. Thorne, due to non-payment of the last 3 quarterly cycles, total $9,600, we are forced to suspend Toby's intensive speech and occupational therapy sessions effective immediately. As these sessions are critical for his developmental window, we urge you to settle the balance." I sat back, the leather of my chair creaking like a warning. Chloe wasn't just stealing for clout. She was stealing time. In pediatric therapy, a missed window isn't just a delay, it's a permanent loss of potential. She had traded Toby's voice for a chartered flight to a creator retreat in Sedona. She had gambled his ability to communicate with the world so she could buy a social token that didn't exist. The secondary victim in financial fraud is always the one who can't speak up. Usually it's a shareholder or a distant pensioner. In this house, it was the boy sleeping 3 doors down. I heard a soft knock on the study door. It was David. He looked haggard, his eyes shadowed by the kind of exhaustion that comes from trying to maintain a lie you didn't even start. "Dad, you still up?" he whispered. "I'm always up, David. Accountants don't sleep. We just close the books for a few hours." I gestured to the chair across from me. "How's Toby? I heard he missed his session today." David flinched. He sat down, his shoulders slumped. "Yeah. Chloe said the clinic is having billing issues with the trust's new digital portal. She told me not to worry, that she's optimizing the cash flow and it'll be sorted by Monday. She's really stressed about the brand, Dad. She says if we don't hit 2 million followers by June, the sponsors will pull out and we'll lose everything." "Everything?" I asked, leaning forward into the pool of light from my desk lamp. "Is it the house? Is it the car? Or is it your son's progress?" David looked away. "She says we have to invest in the future. She says you're holding on to the past and it's choking us." "I'm holding on to the principle, David, the thing that stays when the followers disappear." I slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was the North Star arrears notice. "She didn't tell you the clinic suspended him, did she?" David read the paper, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. She told me she paid it.
She showed me a screenshot of the confirmation. Screenshots can be edited, David. Ledgers cannot. I stood up, my joints popping in the quiet room. She's not just optimizing the trust, she's liquidating your son's future to fund an illusion. She's using his medical fund to buy engagement packages from a server farm in Bangladesh. Dad, I didn't know. That's the problem with modern finance, son. It's designed to make sure you don't know until the bailiff is at the door. I walked to the safe and pulled out a thick envelope of cash, my emergency contingency fund. Take this. Go to North Star tomorrow morning. Pay the balance in person. Don't tell Chloe. Tell them to resume the sessions immediately. David took the envelope, his hands shaking. What are you going to do? I'm going to finish the audit, I said, and then I'm going to trigger the involuntary realignment. I watched him leave, a man broken by the aesthetic of a life he couldn't afford. I went back to my monitors. My eyes were cold. Chloe had crossed the one line a DOJ man never forgives. She had turned a financial fraud into a personal injury. I opened the file for Chloe Thorne Media LLC one last time. I didn't look at the bank statements. I looked at the legal structure. I found exactly what I needed. She had listed the family trust as a secondary guarantor for a $250,000 business expansion loan she'd taken out last month. She had forged my digital signature on the guarantee. If she defaulted, which she would given her burn rate, the bank would come for the house. My house. Martha's house. The first crack was gone. The structure was in a full, silent collapse. I checked my watch. 1:15 a.m. I picked up my phone and sent one final text to my contact at FinCEN. Don't wait for Friday. The victim is a minor. Trigger the freeze and seize at 9 a.m. tomorrow. I want the LLC's accounts locked before she wakes up for her morning routine video. I leaned back and closed my eyes. Chloe wanted mindset shifts. She was about to wake up to a reality shift that no manifestation could fix.
The sun began to bleed over the horizon, casting a cold, clinical gray light into my study. I hadn't slept. For a DOJ man, the hours between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. are the golden window, the time when the world's servers are quiet and the data is most vulnerable. Chloe thought she was playing a game of aesthetics. She didn't realize I was playing a game of structural integrity. I had spent the last 4 hours setting the invisible trap. In forensic accounting, this isn't a physical cage, it's a legal and financial cordon. I didn't just want to stop her, I wanted to ensure that when the hammer fell, there was no pivot left for her to make. I used my legacy credentials to access the Secretary of State's business portal. I filed a Notice of Disputed Ownership against Chloe Thorne Media LLC. I attached the evidence of the forged signature on the $250,000 expansion loan. This didn't just flag the account, it placed an immediate administrative freeze on the LLC's ability to transfer assets. To the bank's algorithm, Chloe was no longer a growth partner, she was a high-risk liability. I sent an anonymous encrypted tip to the trust and safety departments of the 3 major social media platforms Chloe used. I didn't send a mean message. I sent the data logs from the Bangladeshi and Russian server farms I'd tracked. I showed the inorganic engagement patterns funded by the family trust. In the world of influencers, shadow banning is a death sentence. By 8 a.m., her reach would drop to 0. Her 1.2 million followers would become a graveyard of deleted accounts. I pulled the lease agreement for the content studio she rented downtown. She had signed it using the trust's EIN, employer identification number, without authorization. I contacted the landlord, a man I'd helped with a tax audit years ago, and informed him that the lease was void ab initio, invalid from the start, due to fraud. "I'm sending a crew to change the locks at 9 a.m., Silas," he told me over the phone. "I don't want the DOJ anywhere near my buildings." I sat back and watched the clock on my wall. 8:45 a.m. I walked to the kitchen and began to brew a fresh pot of coffee. The house was quiet, but I could hear Chloe upstairs, likely filming her morning gratitude routine. She would be talking about high-vibe energy, while her entire digital empire was being dismantled by a series of automated freeze commands. I checked my tablet one last time. The suspicious activity report I'd triggered with FinCEN had moved from pending to active. At 9 a.m. sharp, every card in Chloe's wallet, the gold-plated business card, the venture growth debit card, even her personal Apple Pay, would return a code 05 do not honor message. I heard her heels on the stairs. She bounded into the kitchen, glowing with the artificial radiance of a ring light. She held her phone out, filming herself as she walked toward the espresso machine. "Morning, fam," she chirped to the camera. "Today is all about alignment. We're heading to the city for a huge brand meeting, and then—" She stopped. She tapped her phone screen. Her brow furrowed. "That's weird. My feed isn't refreshing. Must be the Wi-Fi." "It's not the Wi-Fi, Chloe," I said, pouring my coffee into a ceramic mug. "It's the metadata." She looked at me, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second before she recovered. "Silas, honestly, you and your tech talk. Did you sign those power of attorney papers? I need to stop by the bank on the way to the studio." "I didn't sign them," I said. I checked my watch. 09:01 a.m. "And you won't be going to the studio. The locks were changed 60 seconds ago." She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "What are you talking about? I pay the rent. Her phone chimed. Then it chimed again. A barrage of notifications hit her screen. She looked down, her face turning the color of bleached bone. Account suspended. Payment declined. Access denied. "What did you do?" she hissed, the influencer persona vanishing to reveal the jagged, desperate thief beneath. "What did you do to my accounts?" "I didn't do anything, Chloe," I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "I simply showed the work. The DOJ, the IRS, and the platform moderators are just checking the math. And as we discussed, the math never lies." She lunged for me, but I didn't move. I didn't have to. A heavy knock sounded at the front door, not a neighborly knock, an authoritative one. "That will be the realignment team," I said. "They're not here for a brand meeting. They're here for the audit." The morning light through the kitchen window was harsh, catching every particle of dust in the air. The heavy, rhythmic knocking at the front door continued, a sound that signaled the end of a long, expensive lie. Chloe stood paralyzed, her titanium-encased iPhone still clutched in her hand like a dead bird. The live indicator was gone. Her digital world had flatlined. "Silas, you crazy old man," she hissed, her voice trembling. "You don't know what you've done. I have contracts. I have sponsors. You're ruining a multi-million-dollar brand." "A brand built on a foundation of theft, Chloe," I said, leaning against the counter. "In my profession, we don't call that a brand. We call it a Ponzi scheme of influence." I walked to the front door. Standing there was a man in a charcoal suit and a woman carrying a mobile forensic workstation. Behind them, 2 uniformed officers waited by the curb. "Silas," the man in the suit said, nodding. It was Miller, a former protege of mine from the DOJ's Criminal Investigation Division. "We've got the warrants. We're here for the hardware and the financial records of Chloe Thorne, LLC. "Everything is in the guest wing," I said, stepping aside. "The primary server is under the vanity. The ledgers, the real ones, are on an encrypted drive in the top drawer." Chloe rushed into the hallway, her face a mask of jagged fury. "You can't be here. This is a private residence. David! David, help me!" David appeared at the top of the stairs, looking down at the chaos. He didn't move. He held a small plastic bag of Toby's Lego bricks in one hand and the receipts from the pediatric clinic in the other. He looked at his wife, and for the first time in years, he didn't see an icon. He saw a liability. "They're here for the audit, Chloe," David said, his voice flat. "The one you said would never happen." The investigators moved with surgical efficiency.
They didn't toss the room, they mirrored the data. Miller sat at the kitchen table and opened a thick blue folder, the one I had compiled. "Mrs. Thorne," Miller said, his voice as dry as parchment, "according to the forensic trace provided by the trustee, you've misappropriated over $400,000 from a protected family trust. You've committed wire fraud, identity theft by forging a guarantor's signature, and tax evasion by claiming personal luxury expenses as business losses." "It was an investment," she screamed. "I was going to pay it back. The followers were real, mostly." "The followers don't matter to the IRS, Chloe," I said, walking toward her. I reached out and took the gold-linked Chanel necklace from around her neck. She was too stunned to stop me. "And neither does the aesthetic. What matters is the principle. You stole from a dead woman's legacy and a child's ability to speak." I turned to Miller. "Did you find the Prime Aesthetics invoices?" "Confirmed," Miller said, tapping his tablet. $16,000 in cosmetic procedures billed as digital asset refinement. That's a straight-line embezzlement charge. Chloe collapsed into a chair, the bravado finally draining out of her. Without the ring light, without the filters, she looked small, tired, and profoundly ordinary. The high-vibe energy had been replaced by the cold reality of a federal sentencing guideline. "What happens now?" she whispered. "Now," I said, sitting across from her, "the trust is being placed under permanent forensic receivership. I am revoking your residency in this house. Your accounts are seized. Your brand is a matter of public record for the fraud division. And as for Toby..." I looked up at David, who was finally walking down the stairs. "Toby is going to therapy this afternoon," David said firmly, "paid for by the money my father saved, not the money you stole." The investigators moved forward. They didn't use sirens. They didn't need to. The silence of the house was loud enough. As they led Chloe out the door, she looked back at me, not with anger, but with a terrifying, hollow confusion. She still didn't understand why the math hadn't worked for her. I walked back to my study and closed the door. The grand reckoning wasn't an explosion, it was a settlement. Every dollar she had spent on vanity was now being clawed back by the state. Every lie she had told was being transcribed into a deposition. I checked my watch. 10:45 a.m. I picked up a pen and opened my physical ledger. I turned to the page for Toby's fund. I wrote a single bold entry in black ink. Recovery of assets, $412,650. Status, secured. I leaned back and looked at Martha's portrait. The house was quiet again. The clutter had been cleared.
The guest wing was a ghost town. The high-powered ring lights had been dismantled. The designer racks were empty. And the expensive content studio now smelled of nothing but floor wax and the cold realization of a closed case. The authorities had taken the hardware. The Chloe Thorne Media neon sign was in a landfill, and the silence of the house had returned, heavy but no longer haunted. I sat at my desk in the main study. The afternoon sun was mellow, casting long, peaceful bars across the room. David was upstairs, reading to Toby. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't hear a gimbal motor whirring or a practiced high-pitched laugh through the vents. I opened the Martha P. Thorne Family Trust physical ledger for the last time. In the DOJ, we have a term for this, the reconciliation. It's the final step where the stolen assets are restored to their rightful columns and the liability is written off. I picked up my silver fountain pen. The ink flowed thick and black, a permanent record of a battle won by the boring, the disciplined, and the precise. Final Investigation Report. Incident #trust-CTM. Date of settlement, April 7th, 2026. Subject, Chloe Thorne. Status, indicted/asset seizure in progress. Lead auditor, Silas Thorne, senior lead, retired. 1. Summary of restitution. Through the execution of the SAR, suspicious activity report, and the subsequent federal freeze, 88% of the liquid principal has been recovered. The $250,000 expansion loan has been declared fraudulent and severed from the estate's liability. The house is unencumbered. 2. Damage assessment. The primary damage was temporal and developmental. By diverting the medical covenant funds, the subject caused a 6-month lapse in critical therapy for the secondary victim, Toby. 3. Corrective actions. The trust, now under a dual-signature triple lock protocol, no digital transfers over $500 without a physical biometric verification from the trustee. The beneficiaries. Toby's therapy has been prepaid through 2030. David has been enrolled in a financial literacy and fiduciary responsibility course. The antagonist, permanently removed from the trust's administrative hierarchy. All influencer assets has been liquidated to cover legal fees and restitution. Final log entry. Vanity is a high-maintenance debt. Truth is a self-sustaining asset. The ledger is now balanced. I closed the book with a soft final thud. I walked out to the porch where the spring air was crisp. David and Toby were already there, sitting on the steps. Toby was holding a small wooden airplane, one I'd made for David 30 years ago. He looked up at me, his eyes bright and focused. "Grandpa," he said. The stutter's still there, but his voice stronger, more grounded. "Fly?" "Yes, Toby," I said, sitting beside him. I took the plane and showed him how to adjust the elevators for a steady glide. "We're going to fly, and this time we're keeping a very close eye on the instruments." David looked at me, a silent apology in his eyes. He didn't need to say it. The audit had cleared the air for all of us. He was finally seeing the world without the influencer filter, and while it was grittier and more expensive, it was real. I leaned back against the porch railing. Chloe had been right about one thing. I was a museum piece. But she forgot that museums are built to last centuries, while content disappears in 24 hours. She thought she could manifest a future out of thin air, but she didn't realize that a future is built one balanced line at a time. I watched Toby fly the wooden airplane over the lawn. The Martha P. Thorne Family Trust was no longer a piggy bank for a predator. It was a shield for a boy who was finally finding his voice. I reached into my pocket and felt the cool, gold-linked Chanel necklace. I'd have it cleaned and put back in the safe. In 14 years, when Toby's sister turns 21, she'll wear it, and she'll know that it wasn't just jewelry. It was the price of a legacy that refused to be stolen. The sun dipped below the horizon. The case was closed. The math was final. And for the first time in a long time, the silence felt exactly like home. The end. Thank you for listening to this entry of Payback Logs. If you enjoyed this high-velocity forensic dismantling, remember to like and subscribe. There are thousands of influencers out there looking for an easy target, and we'll be here to show them exactly why you never, ever mess with an accountant who knows how to find the bodies. See you in the next log.